we just finished up the final week of the Genetic Apex format in Pokemon Pocket. We saw some surprising things. Some new decks are on the rise. Some old archetypes finally seem like they've been figured out. A little bit too late. In this video, we're going to go over those lists. We're going to go over the meta as a whole, and I'm going to take a look at what I think is going to happen to these top meta decks as we move into the Mythical Island format. If you guys are enjoying the content, please make sure to subscribe. I've got about 25k of you that keep coming back to this channel but have yet to hit the subscribe button. So if that's you, if you've watched multiple of my videos and you enjoy it, consider hitting the sub button. I really do appreciate it. We're gonna start off talking about something that makes me pretty happy, because the next thing we're gonna discuss, I gotta swallow my pride on. I was wrong about something. I hate to admit it, but it's true. But for now, take a look at this. This is the Exeggutor Greninja with the Wigglytuff deck. Something that I have been loving. It's my favorite deck in the game right now. And in a 600-person tournament, they started out going 7-1 with this deck. Ultimately finished 7-3, I think, just inside top 32. So I finally get to see a placement from a deck that I created, which is super exciting. I'm very thrilled about it. I love this deck. I think this deck is going to be very good in Mythical Island. We use the Wigglytuff as a way to help us in the Mewtwo matchup, in the Charizard matchup, both of which Mew EX is just the better answer for. Mew can come in and one-shot both of those Pokemon. Wigglytuff can only Sleepy Song, hope to leave it asleep, and steal a game that way. So super excited for this next format. This is going to be a deck that I think we're going to have to look out for. It's so good. Exeggutor EX is so powerful. I think it only gets better with Mythical Island. Obviously, we haven't seen every single card, so hopefully something doesn't come around that's just better than it. Maybe there's a better Exeggutor as we're getting an Execute. We haven't seen what the new Exeggutor is. Maybe there's a good basic Exeggutor that is going to be so powerful that we just need to include it in this deck. Who knows? Either way, this is something to look out for in the next format. But for right now, it finally got a showcasing. It finally did something. I would have loved to play it to a tournament myself, but these tournaments are a pretty big time sink. I simply just do not have 8 hours to dedicate to playing in a Pokemon Pocket tournament online. But again, either way, it finally has a placement. Someone did well with the deck, so thank you to whoever piloted it and gave me this little validation that I might have created something that's decent. Very much appreciate it. But let's move on to the next deck, something I was horribly wrong about. Okay, so here we have it, placing top 16 in the Ursa Day Pocket Weekly is a Marowak Golem deck. I have not been a fan of this deck for the longest time. Normally, it was paired with Dugtrio. Grant, I've never played this deck with the Marowak EX, but when I played it with Dugtrio, it didn't feel good to me. Maybe Marowak was the answer all along to fix it. I mean, it seems pretty good. You can start early with the Marowak. It's got enough HP that it can keep Mewtwo from taking any prizes before you take any. So, and then Marowak just has a very powerful attack if the coin flips go your way. You still have the Onix, and then you have that Golem as that late game attacker. Golem's gonna one-shot pretty much anything that isn't a Charizard. Most of their games were against Pikachus, which I would naturally think that Pikachu is pretty good matchup. You're a fighting type deck. Marowak does very well against Pikachu. It's a Boomerang, comes close to one-shotting, not quite. Onix does pretty good against Pikachu as well. Just a single prize Pokemon that can two-shot it. They did not face any Charizard. I would assume Charizard is a not favorable matchup for you. You don't have a way to one-shot their Charizard. Charizard's one-shotting everything you have. It might not necessarily be the fastest deck. Like if you start Onix isn't going anywhere. If you start Geodude, you're gonna have to waste an attachment just to move it. So yeah, not sure how its Charizard matchup would do. And then its Mewtwo matchup, they did okay against Mewtwo. Not totally sold on the Mewtwo matchup either. Marowak might help that a bit more than the Dugtrio did. But I can't deny it. It got a top 16. I never thought this deck would do much of anything. I've always thought Golem plus Onix were just too energy heavy to ever really do anything. To build up two of them in one game seems like a very tall ask. But they were able to do it. This deck actually plays top 16. I think that this deck will likely not exist in Mythical Island because we are getting better fighting type support than these cards. Like, we get the Marshadow, we get the Aerodactyl. I feel like fighting type going forward is going to be a very low to the ground, just pump out massive damage every single turn. You'll have the Primate for early game, then you'll have the Marshadow for mid game, then you'll have a Marowak or Aerodactyl for late game. Obviously, we'll have to see how things end up working out, but I don't see fighting type being this big heavy style is necessarily going to be the best way to play it. Who knows though? I could again be wrong. We'll just have to see. But yeah, top 16 from the Golem deck. Congratulations. This has been my least favorite deck in the game for the longest time. A little bit sad to see it do well, but congrats to whoever piloted it and is making me eat my words here. Now let's quickly look at the winners of the two biggest tournaments this week. Number one, winning the Ursa Day Pocket Weekly was Pikachu Zebstrika. I feel like Pikachu has been more well-positioned in this format due to the fact that we've seen a rise of Charizard Arcanine and also a rise in just water variants in general because of the rise of Charizard Arcanine. And Pikachu takes a slightly favorable matchup to both of those. It takes about a 55% favored matchup against the Charizard Arcanine deck, and against water decks, it's usually sitting somewhere around 60 to 65% favored against those. You just have the weakness, you're attacking fast. It's overall just a good matchup for it. So this has allowed Pikachu to actually start winning tournaments. If you guys didn't know, for the first 3 weeks of the Pokemon Pocket format, Genetic Apex that is, Mewtwo won every single big tournament over 500 players. Like, Mewtwo it was the only deck that was winning tournaments. Then we saw the rise of Charizard Arcanine. Charizard Arcanine was the first deck to win a tournament that wasn't Mewtwo. And then we started seeing Pikachu win these big tournaments. So all of those meta shifts made the big three of Charizard, Mewtwo, and Pikachu start actually winning instead of it just being the Mewtwo show. And we also saw that lead to the rise in water decks, them starting to perform a little bit better than they ever had now that they have a better Charizard matchup and there's more Charizard out there to play against. So as of right now, it seems like Pikachu, Mewtwo, Charizard, they're both all almost equally good. I don't think that we are leaving this format in a place where like Mewtwo is the top deck, cannot be answered, has no answers to. So we're leaving the meta in a very interesting spot, which is something that's very, very cool to see. For a bit, it seemed like the meta was kind of figured out, like it was play Mewtwo or never win a tournament. But thanks to meta developments and people working hard on trying to create counters to the top decks, we actually got to a place where we have a fairly diverse meta. Again, very insane to see because this is just a one set, format. We only have Genetic Apex. That's it. We only have these cards available to us, but the amount of creativity in this game is insane to see. I've loved watching this meta develop. Genetic Apex has been a ton of fun. It's even now, like, we're still seeing decks get improved on, like what that Golem deck I was talking about. The fact that someone tried it with Marowak and actually managed to get top 16. It's unbelievable. We're this deep into this format and we're still seeing changes to the meta. What are we now in? 5 or 6 weeks in? 6 weeks into the meta, we're still seeing developments. Just super, super cool. It gives me a lot of hope for the future of this game. I love seeing it. Let's swap over to the other winning deck, which was this Mewtwo. Mewtwo did win the 600-person tournament. Typical Mewtwo list. We're just running the one Mewtwo as our support attacker to Mewtwo EX. And rest of the list, fairly standard. No Giovanni actually is a crazy development. I would love to see this going forward because that's going to make my Executor EX deck even better. You can't one-shot an Executor if you're not playing Giovanni. So very interesting to see the no Giovanni. You also miss out on a lot of those early game basic knockouts. If you're going to get something with 60 HP, you now can't Psychic Sphere for the knockout. But clearly this seemed to work for them. They ended up winning. Will we see Mewtwo's scrap the Giovanni altogether going forward? I don't know, but it's clear that it doesn't need Giovanni to perform as well as it did. Let's get into my Mythical Island predictions, and we're going to start with just the top deck right now, Mewtwo EX. It seems to be affected the most by the new cards that have been revealed, so it seems like a great place to start. Now, while Mew EX is going to be a little built-in counter to Mewtwo EX, it's also going to be a big... Mewtwo EX is just going to be a big benefactor of Mew EX as well, right? Mew EX is going to be able to be powered up by Gardevoir thanks to Psyshadow. So you're going to be able to get a Mew EX up and going with just one energy attached to it at the start of your turn. You can then Gardevoir to it and do your hand attachment, and there you go. You now have a powered up Mew ready to one-shot another Mewtwo, one-shot a Charizard, trade very well into an Articuno or a Starmie. It's just going to be another great tool for Mewtwo. Now, I think that the deck does have to change a bit going forward. This deck is going to fear Mew EX pretty heavily. Mew EX is just going to be a way to one-shot any Mewtwo in front of you, one-shot any, either the EX or the basic Mewtwo. It's going to be a very good way to deal with it. Mewtwo is not the fastest deck in the world. They still need to get their stage 2 out before things are up and going. So when you're playing against Mewtwo, you will probably have the time to build up that Mew EX that you want to start swinging with it. So what do we need to do to Mewtwo to make it viable now that Mew EX is going to be a problem for it? Well, I think that we're going to have to move up to, we're going to need a Mew EX in here of our own. I think if Mew EX becomes too much of a problem, we may even want to focus a little bit more on the basic Mewtwo plus the Giovanni play, just to give up less prizes for the Mew EX. We're going to have a way to get through something quickly. Like, the way Mewtwo EX is going to lose games from here on out is going to be you don't take a prize fast enough, and your opponent's able to send up a Mew EX, which is then able to one-shot the Mewtwo, and then one-shot whatever else gets sent up that isn't just a Gardevoir. But even then, Mew EX is going to be able to two-shot the Gardevoir if they decide to start attacking with it. So things are going to get very, very tricky for the Mewtwo. I think we're going to have to turn it into more of a Psychic Toolbox deck than just a straight-up Mewtwo EX in order to deal with these things. Maybe it's still fine at the 1 count of Mewtwo and a 1 count of Mew EX. Keep the Mewtwo's the same, keep the Gardevoirs the same, but just take out some of the tech cards that we have here. Like, maybe we see Red Card get excluded for some spots, or maybe the Potion. Something like that, just to give Mewtwo EX a chance. But I definitely see it becoming more of a Psychic Toolbox deck. The Giovanni's going to need to stay. The basic Mewtwo play plus a Giovanni in order to knock out a Mew EX is going to be very, very strong. So yeah, I just see Mewtwo EX becoming a little bit more diversified, including some more Psychic attackers moving forward. And I don't think that Mewtwo EX is going to stay as the #1 best deck. I think it's going to get hurt a little bit by that Mew EX. There's going to be a lot more decks that can deal with Mewtwo, so it's just going to be a, lesser deck as is. Some of these matchups that Mewtwo is heavily, heavily favored in are no longer going to be super, super favored, because a lot more decks will now have the ability to one-shot a Mewtwo, which is something that Mewtwo has benefited from very greatly. The fact that a fully powered up Mewtwo in the active spot, full HP, is not getting one-shot by anything besides a Zapdos getting lucky or a fully powered up Charizard. So I think Mewtwo is going to take a hit because of that. Again, the Mew EX is just going to give you a way to get through a Mewtwo instantly, something that most other decks could not do. They have to two-shot the Mewtwo's while they're one-shotting your Pokemon. So I see Mewtwo slipping a little bit. It's no longer going to be the strongest deck in the format, but it's still going to be very, very strong. Let's move on to the deck that I think gets hurt the most going into this new format, and that is Charizard Arcanine or Charizard Moltres, whichever way you're playing it. Charizard's game plan for a long time has been use your Moltres to power up that Charizard, and once you send up that Charizard, you have an unkillable wall. Nothing is going to one-shot it in the format that is played, and you're going to be able to take all of the prize cards you need with Charizard EX. That now becomes a problem, as Charizard EX, again, is not the fastest deck in the world, and it has benefited greatly from the fact that nothing can get through a Charizard. Well, now we have Mew EX, which is going to be splashed into a ton of decks. It's now going to take a worse Mewtwo matchup. It's going to take a worse matchup to any of these other decks that want to play Mew EX, just given it's for the same reasons as Mewtwo. This deck also had the benefit of just not being able to be one-shot by much. Charizard EX relied on that very, very heavily. Now that there is a one-card inclusion that a lot of decks are going to be playing that's going to be able to allow you to wipe out that Charizard, it's pretty easy to power up. all you need to do to beat Charizard is be able to get through one Moltres while still powering up your Mew EX on the bench, or just play something that buys you enough time to get through a Moltres, maybe send up something as fodder, and then go to the Mew EX at the end of the game. It's just going to be very, very tough for Charizard. I think Charizard will still be fine. It'll still be a fine deck. There are going to be ways it can get around that if it's worried about Mew. Like Arcanine is an obvious answer. We might have to start playing Giovanni in this to try to get the Arcanine plus Giovanni play on the Mew EX as a way to counter KO our Charizard that might get knocked out, but even that might be a tall ask. You're asking Moltres to power up a Charizard and power up an Arcanine. You have to find both of them, and then you have to find the Giovanni just for the response. It's going to be tough for Charizard going forward. I don't think this deck's going to be S tier anymore. I would still expect it to be an A tier. I don't think it's going to completely fall off and be unplayable, but it's going to be seriously, seriously hurt by these new decks that we're seeing come out of Mythical Island. Yeah, I think it gets hurt the most out of all of our top decks. So if you just built Charizard, I'm sorry, it's not looking good for you. But it'll still be a deck you can play, just no longer going to be one of the best. Okay, now let's move on to our last S tier deck, which is Pikachu. Pikachu is in an interesting spot because it is going to have a hard time with fighting decks still, and it seems like fighting type decks are just getting better as we move forward. So Pikachu is going to take on a meta share basis, it's going to be hurt by those fighting type decks being even better than they were. And Pikachu does not get it doesn't get to take advantage of Mew EX, right? Pikachu, its damage output is dependent on how many bench lightning Pokemon you have. If you bench a Mew, you're now capped out at 60 damage. That doesn't seem very good. You won't be able to, the only way to power up the Mew then is to get all of your hits in with Pikachu that you want, bench the Mew, and then somehow find 3 turns to power up that Mew before it can start doing anything. I don't see it as very likely. I really don't think that Pikachu is going to find the space or the utility for Mew EX, so it's one of the few decks that is not going to heavily benefit from that card, and it's going to have to worry about fighting decks even more. It's already worried about fighting decks. Luckily, they haven't been played that much, so Pikachu has been able to dominate consistently, but now that fighting type decks are getting better, it's going to have a harder time with its matchup spread. So unless we see some just straight up amazing lightning cards come out, Pikachu might just stay more so the same. Pikachu is still very, very strong just because it's so fast. It doesn't even necessarily have like that big one-shot potential at the end of the game like some of these other decks do, but it can just race opponents off the board. So I think that Pikachu standing in the meta is totally going to be dependent on what other decks start to rise up to the top out of this. Sure, the fighting type thing is going to be a little bit detrimental, but Pikachu is still going to do Pikachu things. Just being faster than any other deck, still going to allow it to win games that way. I can see it falling a little bit. I don't see Pikachu getting outwardly better. I don't think it's going to get just straight up better from this format, but I think Pikachu is still going to be a very consistent threat in the meta. It's still going to do very, very well. Just no real improvements. So let's talk water variants now, which I think do get a pretty big buff from this next set. Maybe not an Articuno Greninja, but Articuno Starmie. You're going to have that new Vaporeon to consider. That Vaporeon will allow you to bounce between your water attackers without ever giving up prize cards to your opponents. That seems like it's going to be very good. This deck will now have the late game one-shot against these big Mewtwo's and Charizards that it didn't have before. Charizard's already a good matchup, so not too much of a benefit, but against Mewtwo, yes, that can be a very, very big deal. For one card, you can put a card in there that's now going to allow you to do what Articuno usually does, which is be faster than Mewtwo, and then at the end of the game, have that Mew EX to one-shot another Mewtwo that comes up. Just going to be very, very good. I think Water is going to benefit very heavily from this set. Again, and now just has that late game one-shot answer to the other one-shot decks in the format. So just a strict upgrade to water types. I think water types may finally see themselves in S tier. For me personally, I believe these decks to be just outside the S tier, top of A tier, but never quite achieving the success of these other big decks. So yeah, I think we're going to see water types finally rise up to S tier. Again, just very, very good. I see no downsides to water types. I don't see anything getting worse for them. It's not, there are no cards that are specifically countering water types that we've seen so far out of Mythical Island. Again, we could see a new very, very powerful lightning type EX that makes Pikachu even better, or makes a completely new archetype on its own. Who knows? But as of right now, seems like water type's just going to get better. So if you've got some last minute pack points to spend on Genetic Apex, I would look at building some new water stuff to try on day one of Mythical Island. I think it's going to get very, very strong moving forward. Potentially new S tier deck. Now I'll talk about Arbok Weezing. This list doesn't have the 1/1 Wigglytuff, but we'll include that into this. Arbok Weezing is now going to have 2 good late game answers, which has been Arbok Weezing's biggest problem for the longest time. If a game starts to go on for too long, your opponent is going to be one-shotting everything you have, and you're capped out at 60 damage, 80 damage if you're playing the Wigglytuff. Not really the best. So Arbok is going to be looking at that new Tauros Pokemon. That Tauros does 120 damage if your opponent's Pokemon is an EX for just 3 colorless energy. That can be very, very good late game. That's something that you can use Weezing to soften up whatever's in the active spot, build up the Tauros, go in with the Tauros, take a big one-shot on an EX. Well, not a one-shot, a weakened knockout from the Weezing. Still, going to be very, very good. It also gets the option of the Mew EX if it's playing against something like a Charizard or a Mewtwo. Mewtwo, already a fantastic matchup. The Mew is going to help a little bit, but usually this deck gets through Mewtwo just fine on its own, but Charizard, definitely. This deck struggles very, very hard against Charizard. With the Wigglytuff variant, your only hope to win that is to get an early knockout on the Moltres, and then send up the Wigglytuff and hope you keep it asleep for long enough that you can clean up the game that way. Usually, competent Charizard players are not going to give you that late game corner play on one of their bench basics to steal the victory. So usually it's on that Wigglytuff to keep the Charizard asleep long enough for you to take the game. So Arbok's just going to get some great new tools for it, some great late game options, big end of the game attackers that it normally has not had, and are just basics. So you're not going to have to worry about, like, I've seen some people try to play this deck with Muck, but the problem is now you're dealing with 3 stage 1s. It's a lot harder to get that Muck set up. And plus, you also have to weave in the Weezing plus Koga play in order to poison your opponent's active, just for Muck to do the full amount of damage. These are just going to be basic cards that you attach to as the game is going on, and you have extra attachments. Send up at the end, do a ton of damage, and probably take your last 2 prizes from it. So I think this deck is going to benefit very, very greatly from this next set. I could see it being A tier for sure. I don't think we're going to see it be S tier, but an A tier threat, absolutely. And while we're talking about a deck that usually plays Wigglytuff, I just want to talk about Wigglytuff as a whole. I think Wigglytuff gets much, much worse. I've been playing a deck that tries to utilize Wigglytuff, my Exeggutor Greninja deck, and I've been keeping a mental note of every time I attack with Wigglytuff. And that has been, would Mew EX just be better in this scenario, given that Mew EX is more consistent and what its attack does? And 99% of the time, the answer has been yes. I think Wigglytuff as a whole, the function that it plays in most decks is that send up Wigglytuff, attack, hope you leave your opponent's Pokemon asleep. If it stays asleep, you just stole yourself the game. From all the games that I've played, Mew EX would function just as well, right? If you're playing against Charizard, Mew EX is just going to go up and one-shot that Charizard. If you're playing against Mewtwo, Mew is just going to go and one-shot that Mewtwo. If you're playing against Starmie Articuno, Mew is going to go up, and it's going to be able to trade comfortably with the Articuno or Starmie, because it has a respectable 130 HP. So it's going to be able to get into a 2-shot war with these water types as well. I think Mew is just a straight upgrade over Wigglytuff in almost every deck that plays Wigglytuff. I think Wigglytuff is just going to be a not completely irrelevant card, but it's going to be a lot worse. You're not going to see the 1/1 tech in games as much as you have. I think they're all mostly going to be replaced for Mew. Plus, you get the benefit of you can run one more additional card that maybe you have just not had the space to, because you had to run 2 cards for the Wigglytuff. Now you run 1 card for the Mew. Now you can throw in a second Sabrina, a Giovanni, maybe another potion, anything like that you now have the space for. So overall, I think Wigglytuff just as a card kind of tanks, and it's going to get replaced almost entirely by Mew. That's it for the meta update in my early Mythical Island predictions. If you guys enjoyed the video, please make sure you like and subscribe. I will be uploading hopefully 2 videos a day for Mythical Island. I just want to get as much content out there as possible because I'm going to be playing the game nonstop when we get those new cards. Thanks again. Have a good one.